Memphis, Tennessee is known as the center for arts and entertainment in the Deep South. But in 2010, the city lost one of its hometown heroes in a hail of gunfire. The mysterious death of the beloved NBA superstar would confound police for years and bring an entire community together in the search for justice.
I love the pace of the city. It has a lot of soul.
Part of that soul comes from the city's connection to music. Memphis is known as the birthplace of rock and roll, but decades before Elvis laid down his first track at Sun Studios, it was the home of the blues.
Memphis is what we call a chocolate city. It's 65% African American. That shapes our culture and our attitude and the way we are. The blues being founded right here in Memphis on Beale Street. People like Johnny Asen and Bobby Bland and Roscoe Gordon, B.B. King. All of these blues people made Memphis home.
Memphis has always had that good, soulful R&B music, jazz, blues, rock and roll, and it still has it to this day. You can find good music almost anywhere in this city, and we are never at a loss for some good entertainment.
Beale Street also served as an economic center for the town's black businesses. But during the Civil Rights Movement, it transformed into a hotbed of political activism.
Memphis was always sort of a calm town where civil rights was concerned. But all of that changed in the mid to late 1960s.
The sanitation workers decided to go on strike because they were paid miserably. They were treated miserably. They didn't have the proper kinds of health insurance or benefits or that a person needs to just sustain life and take care of a family.
Everybody else was involved in civil rights, coalesced around them. And they were able to get Dr. Martin Luther King to come to town to support the sanitation workers. He led a march. The march turned violent. He was criticized by the newspapers as someone who could no longer lead a peaceful demonstration. He could not let that be the last word, so he came back to do another march. And when he came back to do another march, that's when he was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, right here in this city. And this city has really never got over the assassination of Dr. King.
It proved that we had a lot of work to do.
Memphis has spent the last 50 years healing the wounds caused by Dr. King's death. And there's one thing that can always bring the city together.
Memphians love basketball. It's kind of the glue that holds this town together.
It doesn't matter whether you're black or you're white. When you're watching Memphis basketball, everybody's pulling for the same team. And that means a lot in this community.
In 1995, the city got their own team to root for when the Vancouver Grizzlies relocated to Memphis. One of their star players was a 6'11" center named Lorenzen Wright.
I remember when I first met Lorenzen in high school, Booker T. Washington, senior year in 1994. The coach told me, hey, go look at this kid. You're going to like what you see.
Was an outstanding player, big guy. He then decided to enroll at the University of Memphis. It was nothing but excitement.
He was huge in building that program. He was a McDonald's All-American. Everyone, you could tell.
With his family by his side.
Everybody was in front of a TV set that night when the NBA draft went off. The seventh, they called Lorenzen Wright. Everybody screamed.
He was a first-round draft pick. Played in Los Angeles for the Clippers for a while.
After 5 years with the Clippers, Lorenzen briefly played for the Atlanta Hawks before being traded to his hometown team, the Memphis Grizzlies. The town welcomed him, Shara, and their now 4 children back home with open arms.
The fans literally packed the Forum just to see him play. After all, he's a hometown product. And it was just outstanding for him and for us, for him to be here.
He's one of the giants, of Memphis basketball. He's a hometown hero.
Lorenzen was more than just a player. He was also a pillar of the community, volunteering his time and money to the city that raised him. But 2 years later, tragedy struck the Wright family But before Lorenzen and Shara could renew their vows, the former NBA center suddenly vanished without a trace. July 18th, 2010, Lorenzen travels to Memphis to attend his sister's baby shower.
Lorenzen was living in Atlanta at this point. So the first thing that he does when he gets back to Memphis is go around town and visit his friends before he goes to visit his kids.
My nephew, Phil, he actually picked Lorenzen up and took him over to Shara's house.
Lorenzen spends the evening with the children and leaves before midnight. But the following day, friends realize he's not answering any of their calls.
I got a call from Shara. Night, ain't heard from him. Have you heard from him? No.
Nobody pushed the panic button because it's so easy for NBA players to say, hey, let's meet in Vegas tomorrow. We'll be at the Caesars Palace. 14 to 15 guys to go jump on a plane.
We're talking about a grown man who, at that point, was up in age, and how could he be missing? I mean, did he just drop out of sight? We didn't think that was possible.
As days continue to pass, his loved ones begin to worry.
After the third day of saying he's missing, me and Shara both were like, something wrong, this is different.
That then became the top concern in this town for everybody. Where is Lorenzen Wright? And what happened to him?
The answer would confirm everyone's worst fears.
Georgetown 911, where's your emergency? Hello?
To the city of Memphis, Lorenzen Wright wasn't just a basketball player. He was a role model who proved it was possible for a hometown kid to succeed.
Unfortunately, Memphis has a huge poverty problem. That's just a fact of life.
He saw that so many people had helped him and he wanted to help people back. I have watched him pull hundreds of dollars out of his pocket and literally give it to people. He couldn't stand to see somebody struggling when he knew he could help.
But now, the popular celebrity has disappeared without a trace. As the search continues, the city rallies around the Wright family.
There was a tremendous
In looking at Lorenzen's last moments, they uncover an unsettling detail.
One of the first things that investigators did was they looked at his cell phone records, and they were astonished to find that he had tried to make a 911 call hours after he had disappeared.
Lorenzen made a panicked last-second call when he sensed that he was in grave danger, and you can hear the gunshots in the background.
Georgetown 911, where's your emergency? Hello? Hello?
911 dispatcher answered the phone and did literally nothing. Didn't call the Shelby County Sheriff's Department.
lost even more faith in the system.
We might not have had this murder mystery on our hands if things had happened right, because basically what it did was it gave the killers
Also suspects he'd gotten involved in the Memphis drug trade.
There were a couple of instances that occurred prior to Lorenzen going missing. Lorenzen Jr. had reported that two individuals had approached him in the parking lot after school in a threatening manner and asked where his father was. And then there was another incident reported by Shara Wright that individuals had come to the home looking for Lorenzen.
I got the phone call from her the day of, and she was frantic about it because there were threats against the kids. She said, I gotta call him and contact him on the way he into, and it ain't gonna hurt my babies. And that probably about 3-4 days before he ended up missing.
Did Lorenzen Wright get in over his head with the wrong people?
There's a history of athletes being involved in drug activity. Maybe he was in debt to some people. Maybe this was a drug deal that had gone bad. Maybe the Lorenzen that we knew was not the Lorenzen in reality.
The first 48 hours after any murder investigation are the most important. That's when your witnesses' memories are most fresh. The evidence is fresh. A witness can usually give you a solid description of a suspect a couple hours after an incident. A week or so later, not so much. On top of that, evidence gets destroyed the longer you wait. DNA, fingerprints, security tapes gets harder to collect. As a detective, you have to make split-second decisions. And with every waking moment, your suspect is getting further and further away. In the case of Lorenzen Wright, detectives were a full 9 days behind, so they had to play some serious catch-up.
Memphis isn't a town many would associate with violent crime. But in 2010, the city's murder rate was nearing an all-time high as authorities grappled with an escalating drug problem.
Drugs play a significant role in crime culture in Memphis. It's been said that there are 2 causes of crime in Memphis. The first is drugs, the second is women. So virtually all homicides in Memphis are a result of one or the other.
We have a lot of people in this community who don't care about their fellow human beings and are willing to commit crimes and even try to take somebody's life over nothing.
Now, it looks like former NBA star Lorenzen Wright might be the latest victim of the drug trade.
Shira did express fear at what Lorenzen might or might not have been doing, whether he was dealing in drugs. She didn't know, but she was concerned.
These mysterious hitmen
Might have had something.
Cartel ends up sending a hitman anyway.
career law enforcement think it's a plausible thing. And there's reasons for that too, because the way he was shot. I mean, who would do something like that but a drug organization, right?
The speculation was that they came from Atlanta. They were looking for Lorenzen. 7 days, they could be in Timbuktu.
The former police chief here, he's talking about how close the murder scene was to the airport. And he says he could almost imagine these guys flying in from Mexico, going and killing Lorenzen, getting back in a plane and disappearing into the night forever.
But without suspect.
Lorenzen was smart. He knew Sheriff would take care of his kids. So he cut $1 million life insurance policy with her name on it. And when that policy came in, she took $150,000, bought a home outright, paid about $20,000 and went to a trip to New York to all the kids.
Was it possible Lorenzen's ex-wife had killed him for the insurance money?
People were openly saying, you need to look at Shara. Something's fishy.
They got divorced, and then he's murdered just months later. Clearly, I think there's a motive there.
During their marriage, Shara and Lorenzen Wright had been one of Memphis's most recognizable power couples.
People wanted them at their parties, at their gatherings. Anywhere they went out in public, they were noticed.
But now, rumors are spreading that Shara could be involved in her ex-husband's murder.
There were a lot of people who were saying that she's just not being honest about this, that she knew more than what she was telling.
That was open discussion on talk shows in Memphis. People on the radio, people who even knew her better than I did.
There were rumors spreading throughout Memphis. And when the insurance money came up, it made everybody in Memphis go, hold up, what's really going on?
The $1 million insurance policy isn't the only thing that makes investigators suspicious.
By that time, a lot of the counts had come out.
Shara only adds to the controversy when she publishes her debut novel in 2015, titled Mr. Tell Me Anything.
It's a fictionalized account that's essentially based on her relationship with Lorenzen Wright. It's a woman that is dealing with a philandering husband who is abusive and his subsequent murder.
It's just bizarre that it's so close to the actual story of their life. The parallels are just uncanny. When you get into some of the volatile nature of the relationship, that's when it gets really interesting. It's almost like a confession, you know, that written probably partly in code.
O.J. Simpson wrote a book which said, "If I had done it." This was a "if I had done it" book.
Once Shara's book hits the shelves in Memphis, the city turns against her.
She became a pariah in this town. And again, people thought that she was hiding something, that she was teasing us in a way, that she was manipulative, that she was not the person that she appeared to be.
It's not enough for police to bring charges, but over the next 2 years, their suspicions continue to grow.
In 2015, I interviewed Tony Armstrong, who was the police director. Usually these guys are so guarded. You go talk to a cop, you know, and they're like, they don't want to tell you anything. He willingly did the interview. He all but accused her of this.
Shara suddenly picks up and moves to Houston with a new boyfriend. And then she leaves him for another guy in California.
She wanted to get away, I believe, and try to put this all behind her in some fashion. And that's what she tried to do.
Then, in 2017, investigators finally get a break in the case after receiving a tip.
A lot of us got word that something was brewing and the police department was about to make a big announcement. Later that same day, they announced that they had found the gun in a lake in Walnut, Mississippi.
They do ballistics tests, and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation does, and they match the shell casings that were found around Lorenzen's body.
The finding of the murder weapon really changed everything.
I remember saying, this is going to crack the case, primarily because there was no way for the police to just accidentally stumble upon a gun in a lake in remote northeast Mississippi without someone who was actively involved in the homicide itself telling them exactly where the gun was.
To investigators' surprise, the gun isn't linked to Shara Wright or a drug cartel. Instead, it's registered to a 48-year-old church deacon named Billy Ray Turner.
I knew nothing of Billy Turner. I had never heard of Billy Turner before.
My initial reaction was one of being totally baffled. What's going on here?
In some cases, the police have no other option than to offer a plea deal if it's going to lead to catching bigger fish. The criminal can receive a reduced sentence or even immunity if the evidence can be used to prosecute someone else. You would think that most cases end in a trial, but over 90% of the cases in this country end in plea deals. You never want to let someone off the hook who's committed murder, but if it means being able to put everyone involved behind bars, sometimes it's worth it.
In the 7 years since Lorenzen Wright was murdered, Memphis has been struggling to come to terms with his tragic loss.
For a person who was as high profile as he was, and he had played in the National Basketball Association for over a decade. And for him to be killed, the case had generated a lot of publicity.
Because the community wanted to have the answers. It was awfully frustrating for people who wanted to know what happened and wanted to see somebody punished for it.
And in November of 2017, police finally find a piece of evidence that may lead them to his killer.
Finding that gun brought everything about this case back to the forefront.
In the minds of the law enforcement, that was the piece, the critical piece that they needed.
We were ecstatic because we'd waited so long for some news about who did this to Lorenzen.
At first, investigators find it hard to believe that the murder weapon belongs to local church deacon Billy Ray Turner. But it turns out this man of the cloth has a history of violence.
He had been convicted of a few violent crimes, including aggravated assault and kidnapping.
What's particularly interesting, however, is Turner's relationship with Lorenzen's ex-wife, Shara.
Billy Turner had done some work around Shara's house for her. She knew Billy Turner from her church. And at some point, they had a brief romantic relationship.
He also had a lawn service, a yard service, and he actually used to cut her grass. And then we found out that she used some of the money that she got from the insurance to buy him his lawn equipment. So she sort of financed his business.
After all those years of suspecting that Shara had her husband killed, that's the connection that you're looking for. It's not hard to see her getting this guy to do her dirty work.
I never met him, know anything about him. But I knew that Shara was very capable at manipulating men. And I suspected that, like we used to say, he fell for the okie doke.
Before they move in to make the arrest, investigators lay a trap for Lorenzen's killers.
They announced they found this gun in the lake. Now, they haven't arrested anybody, but they found this gun. I'm sitting there thinking, why would you do that? Because everything, they always hold on to everything. But what were they doing is they were floating that out there so that the principal suspects would panic, and that being Shara and Billy Ray. And they tap their phones and they start getting this communication going back and forth. And that's where they find out, you know, that Shara's talking to Billy Ray in code at one point, saying something to the effect that someone went somewhere and found something, which means, you know, they went in the lake and found the gun. They orchestrated that beautifully.
In December of 2017, Billy Ray Turner and Shara Wright are both arrested by Memphis police.
Shara was guilty in the eyes of the community well before she was arrested. So I think when she was arrested, the community felt somewhat vindicated that their suspicions had been correct all along.
I don't know if it gave us complete closure, but certainly the community felt that we were on our way determining once and for all, after all of these years, what actually happened to Lorenzen.
3 months later, at Shara's bond hearing, a clearer picture of Lorenzen's death finally starts to emerge.
Prosecutors drop a bombshell at that hearing, including the tip that the informant was Shara's cousin, Jimmy Martin. He's the one that told them about the gun being in a lake in Mississippi.
Jimmy Martin had been convicted of second-degree murder. While he was awaiting sentencing for that homicide, he met with law enforcement, and he said that he knew the location of that murder weapon.
The kicker is that he says that he knew where the gun was because he was with Shara and Billy Ray after the killing.
He was with Billy Ray when they were cleaning up the murder scene, and they drove down just across the state line into Mississippi and threw this gun into a lake.
And according to Jimmy, it wasn't the first time Shara asked them to kill Lorenzen.
Went down to Atlanta with Billy Ray Turner in the weeks before the murder actually happened with the idea that they were going to murder Lorenzen down in Atlanta. Billy Ray and Jimmy Martin go to Lorenzen's condominium and open a window and go through the window. Lorenzen isn't there, but there's some guy sleeping on a couch. Lorenzen has a lifelong friend, Michael Gibson, and he's told me that I think I was the guy on the couch. He always found it puzzling that Shara was down there like a day or two before the murder in Memphis. She was down in Atlanta, and it was kind of like, well, what are you doing here? The police information is that she went in the house and unlocked the window.
Jimmy testifies that the first try doesn't work out. So she reschedules for Lorenzen's trip to Memphis. But Jimmy claims he wasn't there.
By his account, he wasn't at the murder. He was more of a cleanup man.
However, Shara's attorneys insist that she had been wrongly accused. If anyone had a reason to kill her ex-husband, it was Jimmy.
When we first got the case and we reviewed the discovery materials, we thought that Jimmy Martin would be the perfect person to have killed Lorenzen. Because, again, he had the opportunity and the ability. He also knew so much about the case. He knew where the murder weapon was, and that's not something that someone who is loosely connected with the case would know. He had killed before, and I thought that he could certainly...
Reliable witness. This is definitely not going to be a slam dunk for the prosecutors.
Despite the lack of evidence, the city of Memphis seems to have already made up its mind.
From the point that she was arrested, she was certainly, in the eyes of the public, she was guilty.
People remember the 911 call. They remember the several days decaying in the hot summer. They remember the lies. So there was no sympathy that was being given to her at that point.
At Shara's pretrial hearing,
for several years, that she was filled with rage at being disfigured by Lorenzen and that she wanted revenge.
as her trial date approaches, the city of Memphis prepares for weeks of scandalous testimony.
It was going to be a brutal trial, and it was going to be scorched earth. If her accounts are true, and she says they are, of the physical abuse, I mean, that's a real problem. Is that reason to kill somebody?
But before opening statements can begin, Shara has another surprise in store.
She suddenly decides to plead guilty. She says that she wasn't the one who killed her ex-husband, but she facilitated the murder.
There were concerns on both sides that a trial would have been very messy. From the state's perspective, I'm sure they were concerned about the abuse that was inevitably going to come out.
They just opted to not do this knockdown, drag out. You know, you never know what a jury's going to do. If somebody's going to plead, that's a slam dunk.
Lorenzen and Shara's 6 children now have to navigate life without their mother,
and that she's going to prison as a result of it.
Billy Ray Turner also strikes a deal on weapons charges and receives 16 years in prison. His murder trial is still pending.
People are expecting a thorough prosecution, a thorough...
About Lorenzen Wright's death may never be known. His family and his fans will always remember the man he was, on and off the court.
When I look back on this young man, a phenomenal basketball talent, a caring young man, I can't help but have a sense of loss.
People come up and tell you things like, you'll get over it. That's not true. When you lose someone you love, you never really get over it. You learn how to adapt.
We deserve to have full closure of this case. We deserve to move forward past this, knowing that justice was done. And until that happens, I don't think that we will ever be really completely satisfied.
Louisville, Kentucky is a southern town with old world charm. It's home to the Kentucky Derby and one of the most famous athletes in history, Muhammad Ali. It's also a town with a history of racial conflict and police brutality. In March of 2020, the shooting death of a young woman by Louisville police would spark public outrage as her name became a rallying cry for justice. Louisville is one of America's oldest cities. It was founded in 1778 by Major George Rogers Clark, who helped establish a fort along the Ohio River. Its strategic location was attractive to settlers moving west in search of new opportunities.
The Ohio River was one of the main thoroughfares for travel at that point in those days. It became a hub for merchandise. Later on, it became an industrial city with manufacturing, and then whiskey, the liquor industry became important.
Thanks to Louisville's fertile soil, corn became a major crop, paving the way for what would become known as Kentucky's liquid gold.
Kentucky is the place where bourbon is made. I mean, nobody makes bourbon as well as Kentucky. And so it's sold all over the world. Most of the money in the city generated by the sale of bourbon. When we wanted to bring back our downtown, what did they do? They created Whiskey Row. Again, it's all about the distilled spirits.
But Louisville's growth and prosperity did not come without a dark side.
There's an industry, there's an institution that's built, the institution of slavery, that helps to build the wealth here in Louisville, Kentucky.
Louisville, Kentucky's history with slavery, unfortunately, is one that goes back to the beginning. We had two very large slave pens here in Kentucky. One of those slave pens was actually right on the corner from where our Louisville Cardinals play basketball. So you have a slave pen that was located right at that corner where millions of folks a year go see the Louisville Cardinals play, but I don't think many people think about that.
Despite emancipation in 1865, restrictive zoning laws were passed to keep Louisville's black citizens in segregated neighborhoods. Yet they still thrived.
One of the oldest African-American neighborhoods is called Smoketown. And that's where many of the families begin to build their homes and to build their families and do their best to become successful.
The reason it was called Smoketown was because of the industries in that area and the smokestacks. In its heyday, you had 3 movie houses. You had the most famous nightclubs and bars.
It was really wonderful, and you knew you could go have a fabulous meal on a Sunday and listen to jazz or listen to someone playing a horn, but it was a very creative, artistic area.
The West End had been decades ago known as the Harlem of the South.
Those communities were thriving even when I came along, only to be basically destroyed by urban renewal in the 60s.
Most of Louisville's black citizens were pushed to the west side of the city, creating a bitter division that remains to this day.
A line down the city divides kind of the West End from the downtown area. People call it the 9th Street Divide.
Everybody grows up here knowing that, the West End is predominantly Black. The East End is more predominantly white. It looks newer, it's, there's all these, healthy grocery stores, farmers markets, but then you go right back under and all you see is gas stations and, just mini food marts. Death rates are higher in the West End than it is the East End because of the access to healthier options of food. The air quality is better in the East End.
Many feel that Louisville's stark racial divide has also created inequality in policing.
Louisville's policing has been very directed towards the West End of Louisville.
I want to say it's like over 50% of the city's budget is in policing. Black and brown folks in the city knew and have known that the policing has just been, uneven, to put it nicely. Black and brown folks have not been safe.
Because of that culture, because of the history behind that institution, I get nervous. I have PTSD. I'm stressed out when I see a police officer. I get concerned for my life. I get concerned for the people who are around me as well.
And in 2020, one police shooting would thrust the city into the national spotlight. It's a little after midnight on March 13th. 26-year-old Breonna Taylor and her boyfriend, 27-year-old Kenneth Walker, are at home watching a movie.
They went on a date night, and then they came back home, got comfy. They were watching Freedom Riders in bed. Breonna kind of dozed off. Kenneth was not fully asleep, but you're kind of super relaxed in bed, about to fall asleep type thing. And they hear a bang at the door. Kenneth grabs his gun. He's thinking it's someone trying to break in because it's just after midnight. They're not expecting anyone. The door busts open. Kenneth shoots. And then after that, it's a barrage of bullets from every direction.
But the intruders aren't robbers. They're Louisville police officers carrying out a search warrant. When the smoke clears, one officer is wounded and Breonna is lying dead in the hallway. Exactly what happened that night and why will remain a mystery for months to come. And when the truth comes out, it will spark a national debate about police use of deadly force on Black Americans. Breonna Taylor was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan, the oldest of two daughters, raised by a single mother.
Breonna comes from a very strong line of other Black people in her family. Her mother, Tamika Palmer, an incredible woman who has so much love, and you can just feel the love that she has for Breonna.
Breonna's mother relocated the family to Louisville in 2008, and Breonna made an immediate impact on her community.
She was that person. If she knew your name, if you had a moment with her, you were locked in forever. She cared about you. She was a loving person.
After graduating high school in 2011, Breonna attended the University of Kentucky. She left the school the following year to become an emergency medical technician.
Powerful women that worked in the medical field and loved helping ran deep in her family. Her aunts are in that field, her mother. So she kind of carried on their legacy.
It takes a type of person to, want to be in the medical field. Like, you have to have a passion to help people.
Breonna became friends with Kenneth Walker online, but in 2016, they took their relationship to the next level.
Breonna Taylor and Kenneth Walker remind me of Whitley and Dwayne from A Different World. I think Breonna kind of tried to play it off, like, oh no, we're just buddies. But she always had something there for him. They were the couple that built each other up. If one was doing well, the other was trying to match that or go above it, and then so forth. They were just always trying to climb, always making new goals. Speaking with Kenneth Walker's parents, They said Kenneth got himself together when he started dating Breonna Taylor. They said, you know, he walked different. His swag changed. You know, he was bragging about his credit score. He was a go-getter. Miss Walker always says that she couldn't picture a better woman for her son.
By 2020, the two were making big plans for their future.
She and Kenneth Walker were going to get married, and they were talking about having a family.
They had a baby name picked out already. Kenneth Walker had his mother's ring ready to give it to Breonna Taylor shortly.
She was following all the rules. She was doing all the right things. She was just, you know, working her way up in life and really had a bright future ahead of her.
But now that future has been destroyed in a hail of gunfire.
How are we supposed to feel secure in our own homes knowing that anybody can just barge in, knowing the police can just barge in and, you know, kill us like that?
Breonna Taylor's apartment is located on Springfield Drive in South Louisville. The area is normally peaceful, but just after midnight on March 13, 2020, residents bear witness to a violent police raid.
One neighbor described that she's looking out the window and she's hearing an officer outside her window saying, "Ram it, ram it, ram it." A SWAT vehicle rams through her gate. She's thinking there's some battle going on outside her apartment, not knowing what has just happened to her neighbor right next door. Minutes later, we have Kenneth Walker walking out, hands up. There's dogs right in front of him barking. He's just confused. He's saying, what did I do? What did I do? What's going on? She's dead. She's dead. She's in a dead.
The shooting initially draws little attention. That afternoon, the Louisville Police Department releases an official statement.
Early this morning, we had a critical incident involving one of our officers who was shot and another person at the scene who was killed.
Officers knocked on the door several times and announced their presence as police who were there with a search warrant. The officers forced entry into the exterior door and were immediately met by gunfire. Sergeant Mattingly sustained a gunshot wound and returned fire.
At first, the narrative was simple, essentially just saying there was a drug race, suspect killed, that was it, point blank, period.
According to the report, the officers entered Breonna's apartment as part of an ongoing investigation, an investigation that involved one of Breonna's ex-boyfriends.
The authorities essentially were investigating Jamarcus Glover, who had a record for being involved in drugs, drug trafficking, ties to a trap house on the West Louisville side of the community. What brought them to Breonna Taylor's door is Breonna had a relationship with him in the past. That was essentially one of the main links they used to say, okay, you know, assuming she must be connected with him.
Detectives obtained the search warrant based on evidence that Jamarcus was sending Breonna suspicious packages.
It was listed on the affidavit that was used on the warrant that these suspected packages were going to Breonna Taylor's home and they could have possibly had drugs in them.
That's what the justification was for this. And so they got a no-knock warrant because they said that they had some reasonable suspicion that that person would be there.
The warrant didn't require police to announce their presence, but the officers involved say they did anyway. When they stepped inside, Kenneth fired a shot, hitting Officer Mattingly. He and two other officers returned to fire.
If this is the entrance door, her bedroom's all the way back here at the end of the hallway. Kenneth, you know, has his gun. Door busts open, he shoots and kind of tries to go in this bedroom. And I'm not sure if, you know, Breonna didn't get down fast enough or whatnot, but she falls at the end of that hallway.
Breonna Taylor was struck, I believe, 6 times, 5 or 6 times.
Check that wrist, dude. Check the wrist.
Breonna died from her wounds at 12:48 a.m. By 1 a.m., Kenneth was arrested for the attempted murder of a police officer.
He's taken to police headquarters, he's questioned. He says he still has, blood and stuff on his shirt. And they start questioning right away about what happened.
Just you and her? Anybody else live there?
He admits to shooting a police officer after he thought it was someone breaking in his home. He didn't know it was a police officer when he fired his gun.
So you just fired off one?
Yeah, just one. That was just a warning. I don't know who's coming to this door. The door just got kicked off the hinges, so I'm scared.
There are a lot of situations when it's fight or flight. And the first thing you're gonna do is protect your home.
On Saturday, March 14th, Kenneth pleads not guilty to the charges. The following day, Breonna's name is finally released to the public. Louisville police consider the shooting justified, portraying the shooting as a drug bust gone bad. But Breonna's loved ones push back. They flood social media with messages about Breonna.
The only reason why any of this ever made news was because her family was relentless in making sure someone listened and someone did something about what happened to her.
It soon becomes evident there's much more to the story than initially reported.
If you look at the pictures from the site that day, the number of bullet strikes in the home is overwhelming. Bullets inside of drawers, that went through the wood. I mean, bullets everywhere.
A no-knock warrant gives police the authority to enter a suspect's home without warning. Their use, however, is often controversial.
They can just ram the door in because they don't want to give a criminal the opportunity to start bagging things up and throwing things away and getting rid of the evidence that they need in order to bring charges.
Of course, most times officers are assuming, it's drug dealers or someone that's a threat to society. When you're wrong, if you make a mistake and warrants are no-knock warrants, that is traumatizing.
In the weeks following the death of 26-year-old health worker Breonna Taylor, the story draws increasing media attention. Many credit Breonna's family for getting her story out.
What started to bring this story forward is the people who were involved finally being listened to, finally catching the ear of media saying, we don't have the whole story here.
COVID had just hit, and that was all that was basically taking up airspace at the time. The first, I would say, time widespread people start hearing about Breonna Taylor is around late April-ish, which is still a few weeks after it happened.
When I first heard about her and I heard that she was an EMT, I'm like, this is absolutely crazy. My heart went out to her.
I felt more connected to her considering she was a Black woman. I'm a young Black woman that lives here. She lived here. That could have been me. That could have been my sister. That could have been my auntie, my mother.
The shooting comes at a time when awareness about the use of deadly force by police is growing throughout the country.
Felt like every day, every week, there was another one. Hey, did you hear about the police killing? Which one? People we're just incredulous. How is this possibly happening?
Now Breonna's name has been added to the list of victims. In late April, her mother files a wrongful death suit. The family's civil rights attorney accuses police of trying to cover up the fact that the raid was a disaster, starting with the search warrant.
Former Detective Joshua James said that he verified with the U.S. Postal Inspector that spoke with multiple neighbors as well. They said that night they didn't hear anyone announce, no one say police, and that creates this huge issue because it creates this blind wall of what could have happened, what did happen, and why it happened on March 13th.
By 2020, Black Lives Matter had grown from a hashtag into a powerful movement, and it quickly picks up on Breonna's shooting. But it will take another, even more explosive case to give Breonna's family hope for justice.
Man, y'all don't believe me. I'm not that kind of guy.
On May 25th, the nation watches in horror as cell phone video of George Floyd's death at the hands of Minneapolis police goes viral.
I can't breathe.
We were already in the midst of our own storm with what had happened with Breonna Taylor, and like so many things, was captured on video, cell phone video, of this man laying on the street saying that, "I can't breathe," and you hear him call for his mother. After the death of George Floyd, I think folks just said, all right, we got to do something here.
The widespread media coverage brings new attention to similar cases, including Breonna's. And on May 28th, the 911 call from Kenneth Walker is made public, raising even more questions about that night.
911 operator Harris, where is their emergency? I don't know what's happening. Somebody kicked in the door inside my girlfriend.
When that 911 call was released, what it did was it put people in Breonna Taylor's apartment, because what we knew was that Kenneth Walker was charged for shooting at this police officer. And what we knew is that he's saying he didn't know it was a police officer. He thought it was just people breaking into the apartment.
It seems so clear to anybody who listens to it that, you know, that what happened, how it went down, was not the way it was reported. He was terrified, and he shot in self-defense.
You could hear him talk about the fact that he didn't know if Breonna was okay.
Is she alert, able to talk to you? No, she's not. Breathe.
It was sad to hear. It was hard to hear.
In response, hundreds of outraged residents flood the streets in protest. Soon, violence erupts between protesters and police.
There were shots of people rocking ambulances. The steps of the Hall of Justice were covered. It looked like a war zone in the city. I remember being out there, and there's tear gas going off. There's pepper balls being thrown.
But this is only the beginning.
It was like, I have to do something. Like, it caused you to want to do something about it.
The fire had been ignited.
May 28th showed the city, the country, the world that Louisville and the people who live here were not playing when they said they want change and they want answers, and that they want it now.
Following the murder of George Floyd, protests break out across the country. The words, "I can't breathe," become a battle cry for social change. But in Louisville, the crowds are chanting for Breonna Taylor.
Say her name, Breonna Taylor. Say her name, Breonna Taylor. That's what you heard every night, over and over again.
Folks in the street just wanted to, remind everyone why we were there, and that's because Breonna Taylor was murdered.
On Monday, June 1st, another name joins the list of those shot and killed by law enforcement. 53-year-old David McAtee.
David McAtee, or Yaya as he's often called in the community, had a barbecue place. He's a mainstay in the community. And so he was out there, he was grilling. It was late at night, and there were people there. It was at the very beginning of the protest. Technically, there was a curfew, but where he was is significantly removed from the center of town. The National Guard showed up and may have issued a warning or two, and then boom, all of a sudden it was tear gas, which of course caused a panic. And they were also using tactics like what's called kettling, where they would cut off city streets. It was kind of like a maze down there.
According to the police, someone in the crowd fired shots at the guardsmen and officers, who then returned fire. A soldier's bullet hit McAtee in the chest, killing him.
There was absolutely no reason for the National Guard to have been there in the first place. Absolutely none. And there's certainly absolutely no reason to have been shooting into a crowd the way that they were. So, you know, and now we have another community member who lost his life.
I think most of the community members were scared of this could easily happen again.
Less than 24 hours later, the mayor fires Louisville Police Chief David Conrad. The following month, the city council passes Breonna's Law, banning the use of no-knock warrants and requiring body cameras for any officer executing a search warrant.
All across the country now, some are feeling that no-knock warrants aren't worth the cost of life that often happens when they bust through that door.
In addition, the charges against Kenneth Walker are dropped, and the FBI announces they are opening their own investigation. But the controversy rages on. On June 5th, 2020, the day that would have been Breonna's 27th birthday, Louisville sees its biggest demonstration yet. Thousands of protesters converge on Jefferson Square Park.
So you have, you know, people in the Black community coming together, people from all communities coming together, occupying this space, providing water, providing food, snacks, providing sign-ups to, you know, join the organization, to stay in contact about the next march and ways to protest that are safe.
Louisville is not alone in honoring Breonna. Birthday memorials are held in cities across America and other parts of the world. Celebrities such as Beyoncé and Oprah Winfrey add their voices to the movement. And by midsummer, a petition to charge the officers involved in Breonna's death has gathered 10 million signatures. Jefferson Square Park has also been given a new name.
They decided to call it Injustice Square after the death of Breonna Taylor. And there was never a time of day, morning, noon, or night, that it was not filled with people. We saw hundreds, if not thousands, marching every night, every day, every night. You knew that people were going to be out and continuing to protest. This continued for months and months and months.
The folks at the center of the protest community here in Louisville didn't let it die. This incredible memorial popped up from community artists giving their love and time and honor to Breonna and then ultimately to other victims of police violence.
After 3 months, however, there is still no official response, and tensions are on the rise.
Who in here is a Black woman? You know what I mean? Like, who out here is a Black woman? Raise your hand. It made it real because it's not just Breonna Taylor's life, but am I next? Is it my life next?
George Floyd's murder showed how important video evidence can be in holding officers accountable for their actions. But should we have to rely on private citizens with cell phones to provide that evidence?
A lot of sort of police reform has been talking about wanting to make sure that police body cams and dash cams are in place and are running. I'm not particularly sure that that's going to make a whole lot of difference. It seems like if police still feel that they can act with impunity, it doesn't even matter what gets caught on camera. They're still going to do what they do.
The protest and newly named Injustice Square are entering their 4th month when the Louisville Police Department finally issues a report on the shots fired in Breonna Taylor's apartment.
The actual report that was filed was fairly minuscule and didn't really sort of tell the whole story about what happened that night.
LMPD is just known to do some shady things. They have had history of trying to, hide things, shove things under the rug.
Frankly, every person of color in Louisville already kind of knew the narrative about LMPD. This was obviously not the first time that they had done something like this or disregarded people's rights or frankly killed people that should not, did not commit a crime.
A grand jury is impaneled to decide whether any of the officers involved will face criminal charges.
The grand jury heard the testimony. They voted on the charges that they were presented with.
So we're watching everything kind of come to a head now. We're waiting to see what the fallout from that will be.
On September 23rd, the jury renders its verdict.
Only one of the 3 officers even had a charge levied against him.
Brett Hankinson has been fired, and he is going to trial, but not for shooting Breonna Taylor, for shooting into haphazardly other apartments.
The other 2 continue to be, our police officers in the LMPD. That honestly was a huge blow to the community, just to know that, yet again, no one was going to be held responsible for this killing.
The reaction on social media is fierce. Within hours, protesters once again flood the streets of Louisville.
The outcome of the grand jury decision was not what the thousands of people who have been protesting for months and months expected at all. Hearing Attorney General Daniel Cameron come out and publicly say that only Officer Brett Hankinson was going to be charged for shooting the walls in the apartment spoke volumes to the community.
Absolutely no one has been charged for any bullets that actually entered Breonna Taylor's body.
What that said to everyone marching, to everyone crying, to everyone who really felt now was the time for change was that these walls and everything else is more valuable than a Black life.
Once again, the protests escalate into violence. In the chaos, 2 officers are shot. In an attempt to restore peace, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear asked his Attorney General to release the details of the grand jury proceedings. In taped interviews, officers Mattingly and Hankinson both testify that they knocked on Breonna's door and announced themselves prior to entering.
It probably lasted between 45 seconds and a minute, banging on the door.
And this went on for probably 30 to 45 seconds of banging and announcing, knocking and announcing.
Another key neighbor or witness is a gentleman upstairs, essentially right above Breonna. And when I spoke with him, he said he did not hear anything. But then we come to the grand jury, and those documents come out. They say that that neighbor did say he heard someone knock and announce after he said no.
Jurors also saw an interview with Detective Cosgrove, who fired the shot that killed Breonna.
At the same time I'm seeing these flashes, I know that John Mattingly is at my feet. I am also not hearing anything. It is completely mute.
The evidence is intended to prove that the jury's ruling was correct. However, following the release of information, 3 of the jurors speak out against the Attorney General.
Some grand jurors have charged that he bungled and did not present everything that he could have to the grand jury.
What the grand juror said happened is that in that room, they would ask questions, hey, can we charge so-and-so officer for this? Or can we see this evidence? And they said Daniel Cameron and his team would say, no, we'll circle back to that. And they never would circle back. Or they would say, no, that's not important. And they said that Daniel Cameron and his team essentially said, we're only interested in wanton endangerment because that's all we think can stick. The juror said we wanted to try, we wanted to hold them accountable, and it just didn't happen. That's what the insight they gave the community about what happens behind closed doors in the justice and legal system. And it was kind of something a lot of people of color knew, or they felt just watching all these cases happen, and what they feel is justice never unfold.
And even more fuel will be added to the fire when dramatic body cam footage is finally released.
Hey, she's down at the end of the hall.
After months of confusion and speculation, Breonna Taylor's family and their supporters are finally getting some answers. The unprecedented release of grand jury evidence, along with police audio and video recordings, capture the tragic events of March 13th as they unfolded.
From the moment that door is breached, there were hiccups, failures, mishaps. Essentially, everything that was supposed to happen in the planning didn't happen that night. The first person in line was supposed to have this shield. They're supposed to be basically protected from whatever was behind that door. They didn't have that shield. There was a certain line and order each person was supposed to be in so that they have all the clear line of vision for what's happening and so forth, and that was broken. The officers don't even step more than, I think they get in a few feet into Breonna's doorway before the shots go off. In the files, the officer said they saw a flash and they thought it was gunshots. There was also a TV on that was flashing in the bedroom and gunshots coming from the side. And we know now that Kenneth Walker, as he said from the beginning, only shot one shot. So we know those bullets weren't coming from Kenneth Walker's gun. Not only is Brett Hankison firing through closed blinds in an apartment, his men are in there. For all he knew, he was putting his other fellow officers in danger. This whole thing happened less than a few minutes. I mean, it was door open, boom. And then boom, 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 like brrr, all over the place. One of the major aspects that set the tone for everything was seeing the footage, the audio, and hearing the tone after Breonna is killed. An officer asked him if he was shot, Kenneth saying no, and the officer saying, well, that's unfortunate.
There's somebody in there dead? Who was shooting at us?
Hearing that the police didn't even know that she was dead inside, hearing that they didn't send an EMT or EMS or help in there to help her, hearing the officers laugh and giggle. The whole tone came off as a lack of regard.
Ma'am, can you hear us? Old Metro Police Department.
The first thing is to get somebody to help her, right? And with her being an EMT, that was one of the things she would have done for somebody else. She didn't even get that same treatment at all.
After the recordings are released, U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland announces that the Justice Department is investigating police practices in Louisville, Kentucky.
The federal government feels that the actions of LMPD have been so heinous that it warrants an investigation to see if there are literally either policies on the books or practices that are not on the books, but that are essentially policies that are violating people's civil rights.
Now you have hope that will shed some light, and not only shed light, but bring about changes that will be needed and are needed in the police department.
The city of Louisville agrees to pay Breonna's family $12 million to settle the civil suit. As a part of the settlement, the city promises a slew of police reforms. Although no charges are filed, the officers involved are eventually disciplined.
Former Detective Joshua James was fired for lying on the warrant. Officer Mattingly was also fired, and Cosgrove was also fired.
Although her life was taken too soon, Breonna Taylor continues to touch the lives of others in her community and throughout the world.
Breonna Taylor was definitely the heart, the soul, the core for so many people that she basically touched and impacted. And you can even see that past her death, just the reach that she has made with, the soul that's been left behind.
We're going to try to keep her name alive. She deserves that. Her family deserves that. I just hope she's resting in peace right now.